My name is Richard Noble. I'm the head of the art department here at Goldsmiths College, and it's my privilege to be able to welcome you all here today for the third Former West Public Editorial meeting. So Goldsmiths College is delighted to be able to host this event. It seems to me that it's absolutely consistent with how Goldsmiths defines itself as an intellectual environment, and we're honored and delighted that Former West has agreed to come here. I want to just extend a few specific thanks because, as you can imagine, an event like this takes some considerable amount of organization. So first of all, I'd like to offer our thanks to Bach from Utrecht, MoMA Warsaw, and Transit Budapest, who are partners in the Former West enterprise, for their support in organizing this conference. I'd also like to thank a number of students who helped in the organization of things. Our PhD student Marlene Herring, Nell Arne, a number of MFA curating students, including Nell Arne, Angela Kuhartel, Christian Ferreira, Dimitra Kitska, Lucy Lopez, Corey Scozzari, Emma Siemens, and Franziska Wildfelstorn. Good, I got that wrong too. Sorry. So I hope you all enjoy the next couple of days. I think it's going to prove absolutely fascinating, and I hope you'll all participate fully, and I'm really looking forward to it. So please enjoy, and again, you're very, very welcome here.
Good morning to everyone. Does the microphone work? Yeah? Yes. Now, welcome to this public editorial meeting of Former West that brings us together around what we see some of the most crucial, urgent concerns surrounding us at present, and which we try to somehow encapsulate in the title of this public editorial meeting, Who is the People? Constructions of the We. And thank you, of course, Richard, for opportunity to organize this here at Goldsmiths, for your words of offering us to feel at home here, and for making this gathering possible today. My name is Maria Hlavajova, and I'm artistic director of BAC, an Utrecht-based institution that brings together art theory and politics, and which initiated the project Former West, initiated, developed, and guided the research project Former West since 2008. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to, of course, share with you a couple of notes in the next few minutes on the idea of Former West and on the project that carries this name. And of course, I want to share with you as well a relatively long list of thank yous that are certainly due to a large number of collaborators and partners who are behind this project. As I will need to do this in as few words possible, I hope I can count on your understanding, for I will have to restrict myself at times to some shortcuts and footnotes, but I'm sure we will be unpacking these issues of Former West throughout these presentations and dialogues in the course of these 2 days, something I really very much look forward to. Now, while I'm at it, let me introduce the people behind this meeting, and I'd like to begin with the editorial team of the publication Former West, and that's namely Boris Boudin, who is a writer, culture critic, and translator, and Simon Scheik, who's curator theories and senior lecturer at MFA program and MFA program director in curating here at Goldsmiths. Of course, Simon has been the critical key link between Former West and Goldsmiths, conceptualizing and organizing this meeting in cooperation with the generous knowledge and commitment of other two Goldsmiths associates, Andrea Phillips, thank you. Andrea is theories writer, reader in fine art, and director of PhD programs in the art department, and Massimiliano Molona, who's theories writer and senior lecturer in anthropology here at Goldsmiths. My sincere thanks go to Witzke, who's taking care of all of us here, who is my colleague at Former West, where she does remarkable work as a research and program coordinator. Of course, Marlene Haring, and outside. And the students who generously volunteer their time, knowledge, energy, early morning, late night, to make this possible. My own back team at our home base in Utrecht, and of course the funders who made the meeting possible, which is European Union's Creative Europe program. I owe my gratitude to all contributors and, of course, all of you joining us here for these deliberations. Now, just what is Former West? To touch, even if fleetingly, upon the initial impetus behind the idea and the project Former West, I need to summon back into our minds the year 1989, just fleetingly, just very brief. If soon following the enormous shifts which that year, 1989, brought about, the post-communist East, in a move that was at once emancipatory, self-colonizing, and strategic, re-articulated itself into what has since gone under the name Former East. One might have wondered why a similar shift in breaking with Cold War protocols and relations had not taken place within its Western geopolitical counterpart. For the so-called West, the collapse of communism has been interpreted as the final victory of capitalist democracy over its only viable ideological competitor. In this triumphant mood, it has thus largely continued its Cold War routines and has continued acting, both symbolically and realistically, as first among what were supposed to have become equal, if heterogeneous, parts in the promise of a common world. Now, Former West, one could say, is a proposition to reclaim the possibility of the common world so imagined, against and in spite of the way of the West in the world post-1989, and of course talk about the continued way of domination, and even more so given this current moment, or present, that has introduced itself as one of instability and multiple crises. The hypothesis of Former West points in this direction, and the project of the same name is an attempt to create both time and space, as well as new collectivities in the creases of the field of what we call contemporary art, to examine how it can enable us to think things otherwise and enact them otherwise. Now, just very quick footnotes here, three. The first one concerns the notion of the West, and I'm sure it's obvious, but just to point out hurriedly that while different conceptions of the West are possible and certainly at play here as well, one that we have posited as central to our inquiry is the geopolitical category of the West that has emerged from the post-World War II constellation. The second footnote regards the prefix former. To some extent, for sure, former is a cognate of the prefix post, with which, and the intricacies of which, we are fairly familiar, I may perhaps say, in the world of art and theory. The notion of formerness, however, might propose a different way of parting from the past. If I take an example of the actively construed itinerary of Former East, which I mentioned to you, it seems to me that it was not constructed against, it's tricky, I know, but rather in spite of the legacy of what we used to call the East. I wonder how a similar probing into a shift from, let's say, critique to proposition could actualize through the implementation of the conceptual instrument that is Former West. My third brief footnote concerns the seductive yet misleading rhyme between former East and former West, which, now that I installed it in this conversation myself, I would like to undo through a very simple reminder that the Cold War tripartitioning of the world was a planetary constellation known far beyond the opposition between the East and the West. And that at stake for former West are not simple dichotomies and opposition, but of course a way of thinking that is entangled and continuous and conterminal. Read this way, former West, in my view, is not a theme, it's not a concept, but rather a proposition of a conceptual device, or even, if you will, a navigational tool, intended as a way of both orienting within and negotiating the conditions of the present, and at the same time reclaiming the possibility of another future. Thus contains these two dimensions, at least, analytical and the programmatic one. If the former allows us to map out what it means to live under the current condition of advanced financialized capitalism, the latter envisages and anticipates a different world, if you will, rescued and reclaimed from within the present. Now, it is here where art seems indispensable to me, specifically an art undercurrent within what we call contemporary art, if I can at all put it this way, which invests its imagination and creativity into a stubborn insistence on opening up space for alternatives in spite of the condition of the world that markets itself as all-encompassing and fully totalizing. This, in my view, is already a daily reality, specifically given the creative practices I've been working with lately, within the small-scale makeshift micro-collectivities and the microeconomies of relations that accompany a coming together of people, whether it's on streets, in parks, as we've witnessed lately, courtyards, within the domestic sphere, at the halls of universities and art academies, as is happening at this moment at the University of Amsterdam, for example, refugee centers, and other improvised sites where the common becomes a central mode of social and economic organization. Here, creative practice is not just empowering the imagination, as we used to call it, imagination and will to a different world, but helps to actualize it. And while the notions of a people and of we have always been crucial, and in my understanding of articulations of practices of art, really, really important, although always kind of systematically escaping any satisfactory definitional project in art, in my view, it might be that we need to think them as central to the experience of art, yet differently than how we imagined them previously. Now, of course, with this, the existing art institutional infrastructure becomes reformatted as its cartography is significantly redrawn. Once again, this takes place in spite of the established global circuits of culture production, such as the gallery and a museum and biennial and art fair, as these practices of art move transversally in between these and the many-where, if you will, of the overlapping circuits of art and the disquieted world. And then, how does artistic practice itself change as it takes place at the sites for claims of justice of and by the excluded and expelled? How do we go about the stubborn modernist edifices of authorship, ownership, and spectatorship under present conditions, specifically, or even more so, at the moment when the paraphernalia of modernity, progress, critique, or the nature-culture divide, among others, become gradually replaced by another conceptual vocabulary, namely that of survival? And further, how to understand these solidarities today, these formerly unexpected alliances and collectivities that we see forming in this context among artists, refugees, impoverished middle classes in the former West, together with self-employed curators and critics, illegal domestic workers, and disenchanted cognitariat as such, galvanized by the common predicament of often insecurity, anxiety, debt, poverty, humiliation, and even war as we witness it. Now, seen from the perspective of the art world, is this our addressee? Is this our general audience we talk about? Or have we overcome the ontological split between us and them, as we formerly envisioned the distinction between the artist on one hand and the audience on the other, forgetting perhaps that we are both subjects and products of the very same conditions? Now, to be sure, these and many more improvised, impatient questions tell me that nothing seems riskier than living through the present as if nothing were happening, perpetuating in the art world the business as usual logic of our own busy world, something that probably represents a sort of giving up the very possibility of another future. Instead, let's recompose our understanding of practice and world of art in sync with the changing world around us. Given our predicament, asking the question, who is a people, and discussing the constructions of the we seems a crucial point from which to begin. This brings me finally to this public editorial meeting. Leading to publication Former West Documents, Constellations, Prospects in 2016, we organized in the course of the next year and a half a number of public gatherings like this one, taking an editorial meeting as their model. Now, these public collective deliberations taking place in various locales, from London to Budapest to Warsaw to Medellin to elsewhere, aim to renegotiate the knowledges gathered throughout the course of the Former West project, while bearing in mind the political culture transformations unique to the places in which they are held, situating thus the possibility of a formerizing of the West in specific international contexts. Now, when an idea of editing the upcoming Former West publication in public, so to speak, came to my mind, I fantasized probably about a series of public yet very intimate, smallish get-together of people at the table, you know, with a lot of coffee and passionate discussions till late at night, with bringing up ideas, negotiating knowledges and intuitions, showing images of work, of art to one another, fighting, discussing the words, the hows, the when, setting up deadlines, missing them, all of that we all know from editorial work. Now, seeing all of you here today, I understand we will have to together deal with quite some challenges as to how can we make sure there's enough time and enough space for having a conversation, or perhaps having many conversations together. Realizing perhaps that intimate conversation is not always about scale. And given the world we are in, and what subjects brought us together today, I would rather want to ask, how can we be more? Thank you.